Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. We're coming to you live out of our station from Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you are digging what I am putting down today, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like, give us a share. And also, if you want to join in with the conversation, feel free to do so. You can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes the show what it is. So definitely don't be shy. Definitely feel free to call in. I think my wife is in the chat putting out the phone number to encourage people to call in today because, after all, it's a single solo day. So your engagement, as always, but definitely today, will definitely make this show what it is. Julian Assange extradition trial came to a close yesterday, October 1st. Now, the trial lasted 4 weeks with testimonies from nearly 36 expert witnesses covering and focusing on the extreme assault on Julian Assange's mental health, the overt political nature of the charges, and the torture and maltreatment he will undoubtedly face during the extradition. These are the arguments, basically, that the defense is making on his behalf. You have assaulted his mental health in this process. This is overtly political in the way that you're going about going after him. And yeah, if he is extradited, he will undoubtedly face all sorts of torture by the United States justice system that is known for its cruelty and brutality around the world. From here, the defense will submit their closing arguments to the court by November 16th. Now, the prosecutors would have 2 weeks to respond with their closing arguments. From there, the defense would get 72 hours with a final reply. Now, Judge Vanessa Barrister would deliver her verdict on January the 4th, 2021. Judge Barrister has denied bail, which basically forces Julian Assange to remain in a harsh, vicious Belmarsh prison for the duration of the time. Now, understand, all of this is in addition to the 7 years he spent in political asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy. Regardless of what you want to think, Assange entered that embassy not to skip bail, not to blow off the legal system, but because he was believed that he was a political prisoner and that they were after him for political reasons. And what do you know? What do you know? A charge that they were pushed to keep on him was hiding a warrant from the United States. That basically, when he was captured and dragged out, it was uncovered that he was indeed right, that the U.S. was fishing for him, and that the patsy nations of Europe were willing to give him up. This is, again, in addition to the 7 years he spent in the Ecuadorian embassy. Even here, a Spanish firm named Musi Global was commissioned to spy on Assange for 24/7, observing privileged conversations with his attorneys, his doctors, journalists that were visiting. This includes discussing plans to kidnap and or poison Assange. Now, I've covered Assange for the entire time I've been doing my channel. This goes back several years. Regardless of the outcome of the political prosecution, it is already monstrously tragic and exponentially profound. A man bearing only the light of truth. This is your world. This is the real reality of your world. Here are the documents. Look at it for yourself. Don't believe me. Here you are. And that man, bearing the truth, is struck down, ridiculed, and in broad light of day, is imprisoned and tortured by the powers that profit from those lies and the institutions of information distribution that ideally would take prodigious qualms with the implications of the prosecution, instead stand utterly disinterested. How bizarre. And more than bizarre, how profound. The New York Times, The Guardian, The Washington Post, not to mention newspapers around the world, ran one bombshell after the next, inspired by WikiLeaks. And it, as an organization, never got it wrong. Using the response of the United States government as a gauge, what does this say about media in the United States and the value of the information they disclose to the audience? After all, media is supposed to be, philosophically anyway, the instrument that arms the public with information to hold the government accountable, in addition to providing an accurate view of reality. Meaning, how do you operate? How does your decision space resolve reality if you don't have information that's given to you to understand reality. And fact of the matter is, it is the media's job to do that. When Assange puts that information out, when Assange puts those leaks out, they attack and they vilify him. They go after him. Why? Because he's putting out information that's true in a world full of lies. And that world full of lies, do something about it by going after him. The reality of it is, the United States government used some contrived cockamamie notion of universal jurisdiction that Patsy Lapdog Nation, Britain, goes along with, not just to shut him up, a bearer of truth, but to also make an example of brutality for any other institution that wishes to present reality. Now, despite the leaks the mainstream media gets every other day attacking Trump, I'll tell you this: Chuck Todd, Jake Tapper, Rachel Maddow, and pretty much every other mainstream media outlet in this country is safe. Assange was putting out that information, was trying to give you a view of the world that brings reality. Think about it for the moment. When Tulsi Gabbard goes on CNN and she tells Jake Tapper, "We're army terrorists, Jake," and Jake stutters, stammers, backs away. The government says it's not saying that. The New York Times, of course, after Obama's out of office, runs the story on the billion-dollar campaign where we were basically spending money to pay terrorists with the notion of taking down Assad. Now, the catch becomes, why didn't your media tell you that? Why? Isn't that pertinent news? Isn't that important to know whether or not your country is trying to topple another country? Is it important to know whether your country is destroying crops in another country in order to starve that country? Or for that matter, stealing oil, even after admitting that, yes, the previous president got 500,000 people killed because he wanted to topple the government. I'm making the point to you, is that that's something that you should know as an American going about your way. And how do you process the world if you are only given information from one very specific American perspective? I'm making the point to you that what Assange is doing here is beyond heroic. And what has happened to him is beyond monstrous. A man puts out the truth. The reality of this is, in the United States, and as a departure for a moment, the United States was okay with Assange at one point. They turned their attention away from Assange when Hillary Clinton lost. Understand what I'm saying? The intelligence services might have had a point of view of Assange. Don't misunderstand me. Not liking the ideas that he's putting this stuff out truthfully and everything else. But in brass tacks, when the media hated him, it was because Trump won. And the association with Assange and Trump, meaning from WikiLeaks, killed it. Meaning, if that didn't happen, you might actually have a situation where the media cares. I mean, after all, this could hit them if they're putting out information, espionage laws in this particular situation. And yet, they don't. Rachel Maddow did a story on it at one point, making the point of, hey, this is espionage. But even in the framing and the way she made that story, she relentlessly attacked Assange in the processing of that story. He got Hillary Clinton a loss. That's their framing. After all, keep in mind, WikiLeaks was supposed to be the conduit between those things, despite the fact that Roger Stone gets prosecuted for not being the conduit. They still use the terminology that WikiLeaks was the conduit. And in the framing of Democrats' minds all across the United States, that's the guy that got Trump in office. So the fact that they're crucifying him for something that is, how on earth can you have universal jurisdiction without the same protections afforded by our laws to those other people? Yes, we can attack you and vilify you. No, you're not protected by our laws. How is media okay with this? Media is okay with this because whether you're CNN, whether you're MSNBC, in fact is, even whether you're Fox News, may not want to necessarily deal with the pressure, you attack him. The consensus is he was in some way responsible. More importantly, if you were Donald Trump, Obama didn't want to go after Julian Assange. Obama didn't want to go after Julian Assange because he thought there were problems associated with espionage and how that could be applied to our own media. Meaning, at the very least, he understood, don't set the precedent. If the precedent is set, it can be used against other media organizations, not just Assange, because that's typically the way the laws work. If you're going to go after Assange alone, then you can go after others. Obama didn't do it. Trump, who's been hit, attacked, vilified as got into office illegitimately, got into office by the effect of Russian Facebook and Twitter ads, despite the fact that Hillary Clinton had over $1 billion and had like over millions of dollars in Twitter trolls for herself. But they used that and they went with that. I joked with my mom yesterday. I said, she said, the guy who I used to get food from, we used to buy meat from, his name is Mindia. And my mom said she goes to him and says, hey, I know you're Russian, right? She says, yeah. And because she realizes that, oh, my boss has the exact same name. And I said, because you're getting meat from that guy, they're going to come up with a story on PBS that says Jamarl Thomas his mom was getting meat at a discount from a Russian agency, and that encouraged him to be more in the scheme of Russia so he can join the channel. And they were basically trying to get him to push back against the stuff that goes in the United States. Basically, they were encouraging him for propaganda by getting him low-cost chickens from Russia. She said, you are insane. And I said, watch. I said, the American public believed that Facebook and Twitter ads was able to topple a $1.6 billion campaign or $3 billion campaign. The majority of those ads took place after the election. None of that mattered. The fact that the company was just trying to make profit like any other company. Meaning, what's more likely to be true? Is it a company that puts out Facebook and Twitter ads for clickbait because it wants people to click on those ads? And when the election comes around, it's what you talk about in the same way we're talking about the election now. It could have actually been a private entity that was going for the notion of just trying to get clicks. And the election itself was a perfect opportunity to use this material to get clicks. That was off the table, despite the fact that it was infinitely rational. Infinitely rational. And instead, Russia. Trump and Russia. And despite the fact that agency was in effect before the election, despite the fact that these ads took place after the election, it didn't matter. Propaganda is. And you'd be all sorts of shocked at the way that people can accept those things if they need to frame their view of reality, and if it's continuously over and over and over and over and over, like a drumbeat played. Julian Assange was the guy that tried to break through that noise. He was the guy that tried to give you, this is the light of truth. And the world accepted that, acknowledged that, utilized that information to process the way they went about their way. But at the end of the day, when Trump lost, you had a large segment of this population that basically were angry, bitter, and vindictive at anything that had anything to do with him getting in office. And that's where we are. So you have a large part of the country that basically, out of political reasons, misinformation, and basically a conspiracy theory, allows him to die on the vine, not caring. Angry and bitter and vindictive. Whatever happens to him, happens to him. You have another segment of the population, like myself, and a lot of other people that are in the UK that are angry that this is happening to him and find this to be outrageous. I agree with him. And the Julian Assange case, definitely pay attention to it. Definitely. It feels like anything that you do is insignificant in this process. And that's the aggravation with this. We cover this case. We don't cover this case every day, but we do cover this case. And it is something that all of us watch, all of us are concerned about. I'm going to end this here. We're going to come back with Alexander McCurris. We're going to talk a little bit more about Assange and get into issues of the UK. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.